I've played over 1800 hours of Souls-likes, and in this video I'll explain which ones I recommend the most and the least. I won't hold back or show favoritism. In fact, toward the end we'll talk about a From Software Souls game that I actually don't recommend much. We'll start with what I personally consider to be the best Souls-likes in no particular order, and from there we'll look for the next best games that resemble each of those in quality. My criteria is mainly based on how well they execute their core gameplay ideas rather than how innovative they are. Also, I'll only focus on 3D Souls-likes that stick closely to the core premise of Dark Souls 1. For a game to be considered in this video, it needs to meet most of the following points, though not necessarily all. Checkpoints should respawn enemies. The basic healing items should regenerate at those checkpoints. There should be challenging boss fights where the only thing separating you from victory is persistence and repetition. The combat must be real time, with a strong emphasis on hitbox collisions, meaning attacks shouldn't auto-adjust your position, and it should take skill to judge the distance and angle of your strikes. A counterexample would be the Arkham Batman series, where your character auto-locks to the nearest enemy from a long distance with little input. You shouldn't be able to spam attacks freely, either due to a stamina bar or other mechanics that limit you, such as enemies blocking you in Sekiro. It should be an RPG with gear variety and multiple playstyle options. At the end, I'll talk about some games I don't recommend unless very specific conditions are met, though that doesn't mean they're bad necessarily. But first, let's dive into the top picks. Let's start with the obvious. Elden Ring is From Software's most successful title, and if you're watching this video, chances are you've at least heard of it. They took their classic Dark Souls formula and added an open world, expanded combat mechanics like partial iframe jumping, customizable weapon skills, guard counters, crouching, and much more. There were some criticisms about repetitive dungeons, reused bosses, and certain open world areas feeling a bit empty, but these are minor issues that don't take away from what is otherwise a masterpiece. What's more, in its Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, From nailed the size and variety of the new area. Personally, I think this DLC has the best level design the series has ever seen. It could honestly be its own standalone game with how big and dense it is. I recommend Elden Ring to anyone who breathes. No, seriously, it's one of the most influential games in history, and the perfect entry point into the genre. Even if you're not into Souls-likes, give it a shot. It's a fantastic action RPG that respects your time and intelligence. It's long, dense with content, and it even has PC mods like Reforged or Convergence that add even more. If it's not already in your library, it should be. Right next to Baldur's Gate 3 and Fall of New Vegas. Nioh 2 is what happens when you take a character action game like Ninja Gaiden or Devil May Cry and turn it into Souls-like with an incredibly long and mechanically deep endgame. To me, this is the most complex melee PvE action game that's a mouthful in existence. You could play it for thousands of hours and still not master your character. In most Souls-likes, the focus is on learning the enemies, but in Nioh 2, the focus is on mastering your own character, with 3 stances per weapon, each with multiple combo paths, a customizable skill tree for each of the 11 weapon types, 6 spells, 2 simultaneous demon forms, and tons of RPG mechanics. It's absurdly deep. On top of that, it's structured like a Diablo game, with increasing difficulties that introduce new gear and mechanics, culminating in the Underworld, a brutal endgame that's easily the hardest in this entire video. Nioh 2 is for players who want not just to play, but to spend hours perfecting their playstyle. The new games are often closer to fighting games than traditional Souls-likes. They demand not only repetition, but focus and a strong desire to improve. The Remnant series is what you get when you blend a third-person shooter with a Souls-like in the best way possible. It plays just like you'd expect from a Souls-like, except most of the time you're shooting enemies instead of bonking them with a giant stick. bonk. Remnant 2 refines everything from the first game, adding a very interesting dual class system, more customization, and more gear. What really makes this series shine is how well that Souls-style hitbox-focused combat fits into a shooter. With iframe dodges, player-controlled healing, and fixed-range attacks, you don't need to rely on cover as much, avoiding that boring wait to regenerate gameplay seen in Call of Duty or Uncharted. In my opinion, this type of shooter should be the future for any fluid, non-realistic shooter. It's not just a great Souls-like, it's the gold standard for modern PvE shooters. And on top of all that, its cope design is excellent. Many Souls-likes design bosses for solo play first, and only tack on multiplayer later. Not here. If you like shooters, RPGs, Souls-likes, or co-op games, this series is a must play. Imagine you throw all the From Software games before Elden Ring into a blender and somehow get the best remix you could possibly imagine. That's Lies of P. A perfect mix of Sekiro, Bloodborne, and Dark Souls, all wrapped in the linear, classic From style formula that came before Elden Ring. And in my opinion, the result is greater than the sum of its parts. Lies of P doesn't punish you for using dodges with iframes, nor does it make perfect blocks the only viable defense like Sekiro. It doesn't punish you for using a shield either, unlike Bloodborne. On top of that, it offers an arsenal and RPG elements close to Dark Souls, but with even more. Weapon crafting, multi-skill weapons, and a customizable mechanical arm like in Sekiro. And let's not forget the story. Lies of P puts a dark, mature spin on Pinocchio, and its Overture's expansion is fantastic. This is the ideal game for Souls purists. It's the best execution of From's classic formula, and a great entry point to the genre if Elden Ring feels too big. The Surge 2 may look like a traditional Souls-like in the style of Lies of P, just set in a dystopian future. But it stands out thanks to two brilliantly executed mechanics, dismemberment and directional parries. Every enemy in Surge 2 has specific body parts you can target, and each enemy and part is uniquely designed. For instance, a boss might have weaker unarmored spots for more damage, or armored limbs that can be destroyed to disable certain attacks. If you manage to dismember a part, even on a boss, you can often obtain it for your own exosuit. This pairs brilliantly with directional parries, and like a simple press button at right time system, you have to aim the stick or mouse in the direction of the incoming attack, making it much harder to spam and way more skill-based. The Surge 2 stands out for being a completely unique take on the genre while executing its ideas perfectly. Its bosses are tough and allow for multiple strategies depending on what parts you target and how well you parry. There's nothing else quite like this combat system. It's like turning Dead Space into a melee RPG. And pulling off such an innovative system this well earns it a solid place among the best. Let's now take a look at some great similar games to those 5 main titles. In my opinion, they don't quite reach the heights of the top, but they're definitely interesting games you'll probably want to try if you like the ones above. If you enjoyed Elden Ring, odds are you'll also like the Dark Souls trilogy. People often call Elden Ring Dark Souls 4 or Open World Dark Souls, after all. Each Dark Souls builds on the previous one, but with its own structure. Dark Souls 1 is the most open in terms of exploration. There are multiple ways to reach the same areas and lots of optional zones. Some people call it a Metroidvania, although I wouldn't go that far. There's still significant player level restrictions depending on which path you take. Still, more experienced players can venture into tougher areas early to pick up items or skip segments. Even today, it holds up well, though mechanically it's quite simple and often pushes you into spamming light attacks. That said, its interconnected world is very engaging, and the bosses, while simpler than in later entries, are iconic. That first time you return to fighting Shrine through a shortcut is unforgettable. Dark Souls 2 has a semi-linear structure. Once you reach the central half of Majula, you can take any of 4 available paths. Rather than a tightly connected world, the regions here are a bit more separated, though there are a few shortcuts, between them. Dark Souls 2 improved a lot on combat systems, especially dual wielding. Even now, it has more depth than Elden Ring in that regard, with each weapon combo having unique heavy attacks and the ability to seamlessly switch to one-handed attacks. There are a few design quirks, like how invincibility frames during dodges scale with the ADP stat, or the fact that you lose a chunk of your max HP each time you die. But these are minor gripes. It's still a fun game, even if the Estus drinking animation felt like it took 2 business days. I'd recommend the Scholar of the First Sin edition, which fixes many issues like enemy overpopulation and adds all the DLCs, plus an extra final boss. Dark Souls 3 is the most linear of the three, but that doesn't make it any less compelling. It introduced weapon arts, brought back a mana bar from Demon Souls, and while it dropped the flexible dual wielding system from DS2, some paired weapons still offer unique movesets. It's smoother than its predecessors, Estus is faster, animations are quicker, and the bosses are much faster. Defensive tools like jam dodges or crouching weren't present yet, and the bosses are generally easier than those in Elden Ring, but it's still very enjoyable today. Let's talk about the games you'll probably enjoy if you like Lies of P. Sekiro is an odd Souls game. It barely has any RPG elements and is more of a pure action game. But as we said earlier, a Souls-like doesn't need to tick every box to qualify. In Sekiro, you wield a katana and can parry attacks by blocking with perfect timing. Your prosthetic arm also offers various tools, basically this game's version of magic. The combat is straightforward, but not easy. Hit the enemy until they parry, then start parrying their attacks until you break through and strike back. Attacking from blind spots can prevent parries, so positioning matters. But don't think you can just spam the parry. The timing window starts at around 200 milliseconds, 1/5 of a second, and shrinks with repeating attempts. It rewards memorizing every enemy's moveset. Unlike Lies of P though, there's almost no room for gear variety. Still, it's a great experience for 1 or 2 playthroughs, even if replay value is somewhat limited. Aside from the boss rush mode you unlock at the end, that's pretty good. Bloodborne. Permanently stuck at 30 FPS on PS4 or 5 unless you emulate it on PC. It's a super fluid game where shields are discouraged, dodging is quick, and instead of an offhand shield or catalyst, you carry a firearm. And that gun is special. Shoot at the right time, and you'll stun enemies for a critical hit, kind of like a traditional Souls parry. To balance the aggressive gameplay, since you'll be taking more damage, you can recover a portion of your lost health by counterattacking, something Lies of P would later echo in its own way. My favorite part? Every weapon has 2 transformation states with their own movesets, and you can even transition between them mid-combo. There's no equipment weight, so you can carry 2 weapons without penalty, and there are plenty of upgrade materials for both. The Lovecraftian setting is very interesting, and the world is interconnected, but more linear than Dark Souls 1. The DLC is significantly tougher and absolutely drenched in nightmare feel, literally. It's the Hunter's nightmare. My only gripe, healing items and ammo don't regenerate at checkpoints, so early on you'll have to farm them, which is annoying, but aside from that, it's a fantastic game, and if you can emulate it at 60 FPS, do it. Don't tell Sony I said it though. Thymesia is a short indie game, but with exceptional combat heavily inspired by Bloodborne and Sekiro. The animations and effects are stunning. It's hard to believe such a small dev team made something this polished. Combat-wise, it's similar to Lies of P, but with a unique twist. Some attacks deal health damage, others deal plague damage. To confirm health damage, you need to follow up with a plague damage. There's a big arsenal of skills and attack styles to experiment with. Its level system is a bit restrictive, and it only lasts around 10 hours, but it's a hidden gem. It left a big impression on me in just 9 hours. I recommend it to anyone even remotely into action games. The best part? Every single one of those hours is full of interesting content, including side missions. The fact that just 7 people made this in 2 years is wild. The 2023 Lords of the Fallen is a sequel to the very first non-FromSoft Souls-like of the same name, which didn't do too well back then. But this new entry is definitely worth it. Feels a lot like Lies of P, honestly. One of my favorite things is the ranged weapon system. You can equip multiple ranged weapons and their ammo regenerates at checkpoints or by using a consumable. And the variety is excellent: throwing knives, rocks, crossbows, bows. I really wish From would steal this mechanic because most Souls players rarely use consumables since it's annoying to restock them. The combat is similar to Lies of P, though it lacks the same variety in weapon movesets and weapon abilities are rare. The bosses are fun, but many aren't that hard. Experienced players won't struggle much. Its big gimmick is a dual world mechanic where you shift between the real world and the Shadow Realm. Sounds cool, but in practice it's a bit annoying. You're often on a timer and it rarely changes gameplay meaningfully. The game had issues at launch, but the version I played felt fine, so I'd ignore the early reviews. Though I'd probably prioritize games like Sekiro first. The Jedi saga consists, well, obviously of 2 Souls-like games set in the Star Wars universe. The first game is fairly limited in terms of weapon variety, but the second one offers much more, which increases replayability. Personally, I love using the blaster combined with the basic lightsaber. It has a certain je ne sais quoi of a space cowboy. Of course, it's not a traditional RPG, it's more of a classic action game, quite similar to Sekiro in many ways. But the inclusion of multiple weapon styles gives it a lot more variety, which is a big plus, and being able to use the Force as a form of magic is just awesome. What really stands out in the Jedi games is the story. I'm not a big Star Wars fan, and I think the franchise has been on the decline for years, but I have to say these games are among the best in terms of narrative. And it's no surprise. These are the same folks who made the incredible Titanfall 2 campaign. RIP to the third game, by the way, which was cancelled some time ago. Oh, and the exploration is also solid. It features puzzles and classic platforming you'd expect from an adventure game, which is a welcome addition in Souls-likes that can sometimes feel pretty static in that area. Speaking of platforming in Souls-likes, what would happen if we mixed a classic 3D platforming like Banjo-Kazooie or Super Mario 64 with a Souls-like? Yes, I know those old school references show I already have some white hairs. Well, you'd get another Crab's Treasure, a rather charming Souls-like with a story that's sometimes more mature than its visuals suggest. The variety of builds or gear isn't huge. You basically either use a big hammer or a fork sword. Yep, a fork. And honestly, it makes more sense than that blasted keyblade from Kingdom Hearts, which isn't even a sword. Seriously, it doesn't even have an edge. Anyway, yeah, another Crab's Treasure. Combat isn't too complicated, fairly in line with the rest of this list, but it does have the unique twist that to do a perfect block, you have to stop guarding rather than raise the guard. It feels weird at first, but then the light bulb goes off. Alright, you're playing as a crab, you're coming out of the shell. Makes sense. Also cool is that your main spell or ability depends on the shell your crab wears on its back. At the beginning, you'll be switching shells often, but later on, you can choose one to keep permanently. It's a really creative game, and I recommend it like Lords of the Fallen, something to try once you've gone through the main ones. Plus, both are on Game Pass, so no harm done. If you like Nioh 2, the truth is, there aren't many games quite like it. Sure, there's Nioh 1, which is also great, just not as deep in every aspect, but the game that feels the most similar in the genre to that saga is definitely Khazan, which I like to call a Nioh-lite, not like, meaning it doesn't have as many features as Nioh. It's a bit simpler mechanically, but hey, it's very similar and super enjoyable. Khazan only has 3 weapons, but each one has its own skill tree you can customize like in Nioh. Instead of drowning you in loot like Nioh does. It helps you focus on building a setup you actually like with a decent crafting system, and the bosses almost always drop their crafting parts when you replay them. Like Nioh, the game emphasizes aggression. Enemies come at you hard, and this isn't about watching enemies do 20 backflips while you roll around waiting for your turn. You're supposed to stun lock them with combos so they can't do anything. It's a solid game, really well built in terms of gameplay, and genuinely fun the whole way through. It's also quite challenging and features some very good bosses for the genre, especially the final boss of the true ending, which reminded me a lot of Elden Ring's Promised Consort. Plus, the main character is voiced by Verso. What more could you want? From the same studio that brought us the Remnant saga, Gunfire Games, comes Darksiders 3, a prequel in a series that has changed genre more than any other in this list. It's gone from a Zelda-style adventure game to hack and slash to isometric ARPG and now to a Souls-like with hack and slash elements. If you enjoyed Nioh, Darksiders 3 might not have the same combo depth, but it does a respectable job with its hack and slash elements. It offers a decent weapon variety and, in my opinion, features the best interconnected world design of any Souls-like, very easily surpassing Nioh. It genuinely feels like a Metroidvania without the arbitrary level restrictions or of something like Dark Souls 1. Here, you gain abilities that unlock new areas, like a classic adventure game. Jedi try to do this too, but on a smaller scale, and its areas are still mostly separated worlds that don't connect to each other. It's a game I strongly recommend, especially if you're a fan of both Nioh and Remnant. My only real complaint is that counterattacks might be too strong, so you might end up ignoring your combos. But aside from that, it's fantastic. The story is also interesting, and since it's a prequel, you can start the series here and check out the first two games later. If you liked Remnant 2, then obviously you'll like the first one too, just like with Nioh 1 and 2. However, there's also a hidden indie gem I recommend a lot, Scars Above. It takes a lot of inspiration from Remnant, and it's kinda like Thymesia. Short and sweet, about 8 hours to 100% on hard, but extremely well made. The gameplay feels great overall. The bosses aren't quite as complex as Remnants, but they're solid. The weapons are varied and feature elemental effects that not only affect the environment, unlocking new areas, but can also be combined to deal bonus damage to enemies. And honestly, I really like the story, so even if it's only 8 hours, it's 8 very enjoyable hours. Even though I love The Surge 2, I haven't had the chance to play the first one, and I haven't found any game that really compares. It's that unique. So I'll turn this over to you. Let me know in the comments. Is the first game as good as the second? Are the dismemberments and parries just as good? You guys let me know. Whew, here comes the spicy part. Just because I'm not recommending these upfront doesn't mean they're bad games. It's just that my experience with them wasn't great for one reason or another. And yes, there's even a From Software title here. Don't worry, it'll make sense, I promise. Let's start with Flintlock. This one actually makes me kinda sad because it has some genuinely good ideas, but it just feels very unfinished. The hitboxes are all over the place, some attacks hit way too fast with animations that don't even play correctly, and the enemy AI breaks constantly. The hard mode seems like nobody bothered to balance it. Basic attacks with broken hitboxes can wipe out most of your health. I played about 3 hours of it on Game Pass up to the first boss and came away thinking that with a couple patches it could be a good game. The movement is really nice and the combat abilities flow well, especially how firearms work mid-fight. Oh, and Elias Tufexis, the voice of Deus Ex Human Revolution protagonist, is in it. They had all the ingredients to win. What a shame. I played Hellpoint for maybe 30 minutes, just for context, and it felt like a game stuck in the Dark Souls 1 era, except without the strong level design, and with a sci-fi twist. Of course, I didn't play enough to give a definitive judgment, so feel free to tell me in the comments if it gets better later on. But I found it pretty forgettable, and I didn't keep going because the combat mechanics felt very basic. This one might be a bit controversial. Mortal Shell sold pretty well, and they recently announced a sequel. But personally, the first game left me quite indifferent. The body swapping system and the hardening mechanic are interesting ideas on paper, but the basic combat felt, well, too basic. And to make matters worse, the animations are super slow. It reminded me of playing Dark Souls 2 version 1.0 with low ATP. It just felt incredibly sluggish. I only played for about 45 minutes, so if you think it gets better later, let me know. Maybe it's just a rough start. And finally, the most controversial entry by far, Demon's Souls by From Software. The original, the first one, the reason this genre exists. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. Being the first, there were a lot of things that later got improved simply because they had to be improved. From Software and other studios figured out better ways of doing things over time. Okay, Leon, come on, it's From. We're talking Demon's Souls here. What are you even criticizing? Well, for starters, Demons introduced the classic dodge roll with iframes, which is great. But here's the catch. The levels are extremely narrow, either because the walls are super close or because there are ledges everywhere. So dodging often feels like a death sentence unless you're in a boss arena, and sometimes not even then. I'm looking at you, Lichmonger. So basically, if you don't use a shield in Demons, you're going to lose your mind. That alone is a huge limitation for build variety. And if you try to two-hand a weapon, you'll be bonking walls left and right because the areas are so cramped. The bosses are very simple. A lot of them aren't even real fights. You beat them by solving a puzzle. Like there's this one mage boss who's literally immortal unless you find some dude performing a ritual somewhere else on the map and kill him. Weird. And the non-gimmick bosses, they're nowhere near as interesting as Dark Souls 1's. Fewer attacks, fewer mechanics. I actually beat the final boss on my first try. Granted, I lost like 3 levels because his grab attack drains them. He does telegraph it well, but hey, I do have my moments. Worst part? No bonfires before bosses. You have to replay the entire level. Yes, the entire thing. Micah statues? What's that? I don't think Demon's Souls belongs in the same category as the rest of the not recommended games here. It's actually the only one in this list I finished. But it's got flaws, and logically so, because it was pioneering. I'd only recommend it if you're a big From Software fan or really into the genre's history. Otherwise, I'd save it for later. Definitely not a priority Souls-like to play. So here's a summary of more or less the whole video, so you can check it out later and in case you want to try some specific game. I'll leave you now with a build from Remnant 2, just in case you end up picking it up from watching this ranking. And if you enjoyed this video, this is YouTube, you know what to do.